Hi, and welcome to the FundsNetwork pension technical video on calculating cash equivalent transfer values. Since 2008, Department for Work and Pensions regulations place the ultimate responsibility for the calculation of transfer values from defined benefit schemes with the trustees, and not, as was previously the case, with the scheme's actuary. Nevertheless, the scheme actuary is almost certain to be required to determine the assumptions under this regulation, with the aim being that taken as a whole, they should lead to the best estimate of the initial cash equivalent, known as ICE. This is then adjusted, if necessary, to arrive at the final cash equivalent transfer value, the CETV, available to the member to transfer. The assessment of the CETV, as the value is described in legislation, involves a four-part process. Part 1. Calculate the member's pension benefits at the date of leaving. In other words, their preserved pension. This takes into account pensionable service and pensionable salary, the scheme's pension accrual rate, and where applicable, any separate cash accrual rate, any in-house AVCs, additional voluntary contributions, paid by the member, and any transferred in benefits from previous employers' pension schemes. Part 2. Revalue the preserved pension calculated in Part 1 up to the scheme's normal pension age. The statutory revaluation requirements are allowed for as a minimum, along with an assumed rate of future inflation. Part 3. Calculate the capital cost of buying the revalued pension at normal pension age that was calculated in Part 2. Allowance must be made for any dependents' pensions and statutory increases in payment. There is, however, no statutory requirement to allow for discretionary increases in payment, and the decision whether to do so rests with the scheme trustees. The annuity rate assumption used to calculate the capital cost is set by the scheme's actuary and should be on the basis of reasonable annuity rates. Part 4. Discount the capital cost calculated in Part 3 back to the present day in order to arrive at the initial cash equivalent, the ICE. This is done using an assumed discount rate set by the scheme's actuary. There is no specific guidance as to the discount rate chosen other than that it must reflect the investment strategy of the scheme. The ICE must place a value on the member's accrued benefits together with any options and discretionary benefits that the trustees decide should be included. In following this four-part process, the overall impact of all assumptions made by the scheme actuary is more important than the choice of each particular assumption. The ICE may then be reduced or even enhanced by the scheme trustees, depending on the funding position of the scheme and the trustees' desire to divest the scheme of the risks associated with retaining the member in the scheme. This would normally only occur if the trustees have obtained an insufficiency report, which is an assessment made by the scheme actuary of the funding position of the scheme using transfer value assumptions. An insufficiency report or a replacement insufficiency report following a scheme funding valuation is not required unless the trustees wish to consider applying reductions to ICEs. The pensions regulator states the matters that trustees should take into account when deciding whether or not to reduce ICEs, and these include the following: the degree of underfunding. So the worse the funding position, the more necessary it may be to reduce ICEs to protect remaining members. Their assessment of the strength of the employer's covenant. The stronger the covenant, the less the trustees may feel it necessary to reduce transfers. The structure of any recovery plan in place. The sooner a funding deficiency is being addressed, the less necessary reductions may be. Whether there are any contingent assets in place, and if there are, their form. If contingent security is available to plug a funding gap if the employer were to become insolvent, reductions in transfer values may be unnecessary. And finally, whether the employer has undertaken to make a compensatory payment to the scheme each time a transfer is paid at an unreduced level. Where an employer's covenant is judged to be strong and any funding shortfall is being remedied over a reasonably short period, trustees should not normally reduce ICEs when determining cash equivalent transfer values. On the other hand, where there are concerns about the employer's covenant over the term of an agreed recovery plan, trustees should consider reductions in order to provide similar security to those transferring as to those remaining as members. In practice, however, scheme trustees are generally reluctant to cut back on transfer values. Reductions to ICEs must not exceed the maximum reduction identified in the insufficiency report. Employers could also try and reduce the risk in the defined benefit scheme by entering into an enhanced transfer value exercise. This may seem strange that an employer would want to use such an exercise given what has already been stated, but schemes have been trying to reduce their liabilities by offering a transfer payment above the CETV, but less than the ongoing costs of the scheme of providing the benefits. After any adjustments up or down have been made, the resulting figure is the cash equivalent transfer value, the CETV, which is contained in the statement of entitlement sent to the member when a transfer value is requested. Thank you for watching.